March 15th, 1945, 23,000 feet above the cloud-shrouded sprawl of Tokyo. First Lieutenant Raymond Swenson of the 505th Bombardment Group squinted through his Navigator's plexiglass dome as something extraordinary unfolded across the night sky. 325 B-29 Superfortresses, the mightiest bombing force ever assembled over Japan, had vanished. Not from enemy action, not from mechanical failure, but from a navigation trick so audaciously simple that the group operations officer had initially dismissed it as the stupidest damn idea I've ever heard. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. The navigation officer's pencil moved rapidly across his plotting chart, tracking the bomber formation's position with remarkable precision despite the complete absence of visible landmarks. In the 14 months since B-29s had begun operations against Japan, their crews had endured devastating losses. Japanese radar operators had become frighteningly effective at detecting incoming raids, vectoring night fighters to intercept precisely where the American bombers would appear. Yet tonight, something had changed. The radio headset, normally crackling with frantic Japanese fighter coordination, remained eerily silent. Below, the capital of Imperial Japan slept unaware that death approached from above. First Lieutenant Raymond Swenson was not supposed to be over Tokyo at all. Growing up in Pocatello, Idaho, he had dreamed of becoming a high school mathematics teacher. His exceptional aptitude for spatial relationships and numerical patterns had drawn him toward teaching trigonometry until December 7, 1941, changed everything. At 23 years old, with thick glasses and a slender build that made him appear more scholarly than military, Swenson had volunteered for Army Air Corps Navigation School. His instructors quickly recognized an uncanny talent. While other cadets struggled with the complex calculations required for celestial navigation, Swenson seemed to intuitively grasp the mathematical relationships between stars, time, and position. Captain William Martindale, commander of B-29, Lady Luck, had specifically requested Swenson after their previous navigator suffered a nervous breakdown following the January 27th raid on Tokyo. "I don't care if he looks like he should be teaching algebra to high schoolers," Martindale told his squadron commander. "That kid can find his way home through a typhoon using nothing but a wristwatch and a pencil stub." What no one in the 505th Bombardment Group knew was that Swenson had spent the previous 3 months studying something beyond navigation charts and bombardier tables. He had been obsessively analyzing weather patterns over Japan. The B-29 Superfortress represented the pinnacle of American aviation technology. Maximum range, 4,000 miles. Service ceiling, 31,500 feet. Maximum speed, 358 miles per hour. 4 Wright R3350 engines producing 2,200 horsepower each. Defensive armament, 12 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon. Bomb load capacity, 20,000 pounds. Total program development cost, $3 billion more than the Manhattan Project. Yet for all this technological supremacy, the mighty B-29s had proven terrifyingly vulnerable to Japanese night fighters guided by ground radar. The first raid against Tokyo on November 24, 1944, had shocked American planners. Of the 11 B-29s lost, 7 had fallen to night fighters precisely vectored into their path. Subsequent raids suffered similar attrition, rates unsustainable losses that threatened the entire strategic bombing campaign. Intelligence reports confirmed the Japanese had constructed an elaborate radar warning network around their home islands. Stations at Katsuura, Choshi, Tateyama, and a dozen other coastal locations provided early warning of approaching bomber streams, allowing controllers to direct fighters with devastating efficiency. Something had to change. On February 7, 1945, Brigadier General Haywood Hansell had been replaced as commander of the 21st Bomber Command by Major General Curtis LeMay. The change signaled a dramatic shift in bombing strategy. Precision daylight bombing from high altitude, the cornerstone of Army Air Force doctrine, had failed against Japan. Poor weather conditions, The jet stream's unexpected strength and effective Japanese defenses had rendered precision bombing largely ineffective. LeMay's approach would be radical, controversial, and ultimately devastating to Japan's war capacity and civilian population alike. LeMay's first innovation shocked his own crews more than the Japanese. He ordered the B-29s stripped of most defensive armament, removing guns and gunners to make room for additional bombs. His second decision proved even more controversial, abandoning high-altitude precision bombing for low-level nighttime incendiary attacks. The B-29s would come in at 5,000 to 9,000 feet, well within range of anti-aircraft fire. The bombing would target civilian industrial areas using M69 incendiary clusters and M47 napalm bombs designed to create firestorms in Japan's wood and paper cities. The results had been catastrophically effective. The March 9, 1945 raid on Tokyo had destroyed 16 square miles of the city, killed an estimated 100,000 civilians, and left 1 million homeless. LeMay had found a formula for destruction that worked, but at significant cost. Japanese night fighter tactics had adapted quickly. By mid-March, radar-directed interceptors had become adept at finding the bomber streams despite darkness and low-level approaches. The night of March 13th had seen 17 B-29s shot down, mostly to fighter interception. First Lieutenant Raymond Swenson had watched these developments with growing concern, but also with an analyst's eye for patterns. During mission debriefings, he had noticed something curious in crew reports. Bombers that had accidentally strayed into weather fronts reported significantly fewer fighter encounters. While other navigators cursed the cloud formations that complicated their work, Swenson began to see them as potential allies. He spent hours in the weather office at Guam's North Field, studying meteorological charts and consulting with the overworked forecasters. On March 14th, Swenson had approached his squadron commander with an audacious proposal. "Sir, I believe I've found a way to make our entire bomber force invisible to Japanese radar." The commander had stared at the young navigator incredulously. "Lieutenant, we've got the finest scientific minds in America working on radar countermeasures. You're telling me you've solved what they couldn't?" Swenson had pushed his glasses up his nose nervously but continued. "Yes, sir, I think I have, and we don't need any new equipment or training to implement it immediately." The concept was deceptively simple. Japanese radar operated on relatively long wavelengths, significantly longer than those used by more advanced American sets. These wavelengths interacted with water droplets in clouds in a very specific way. When calibrated to detect the metallic surfaces of bomber formations, the radar would be effectively blinded by properly positioned cloud formations of the right density. Swenson proposed that instead of avoiding clouds, the entire bomber force should deliberately fly through and carefully selected cloud formations at precisely calculated altitudes. "It's the stupidest damn idea I've ever heard," the group operations officer had declared when the plan reached his desk. "You want us to deliberately fly 300 aircraft into weather that increases collision risk, complicates navigation, and could ice up the wings? To test some theory cooked up by a lieutenant who's been here less than 6 months? But the mounting losses had made commanders desperate for solutions. The proposal had eventually reached General LeMay himself, who had summoned Swenson to 21st Bomber Command headquarters. LeMay was notorious for his direct manner and intimidating presence. He fixed Swenson with an unwavering stare, chomping on his ever-present cigar. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed your proposal. You understand what's at stake here? If you're wrong, I'm sending 300 aircraft and 3,000 men into a situation that could increase casualties rather than reduce." Swenson had swallowed hard but held the general's gaze. "Sir, I've run the numbers repeatedly. The atmospheric conditions tomorrow night will provide exactly the cloud formations we need at precisely the right altitudes." The conversation had continued for nearly an hour, with LeMay grilling Swenson on every aspect of his theory. The general had built his reputation on being willing to try unconventional approaches, but even by his standards, this was radical. Eventually, he had leaned back in his chair. "I'm approving a test of your theory, Lieutenant. Not for the entire force, that's too much risk. I'll assign 60 aircraft to follow your cloud navigation route. The rest will follow our standard approach. If your formation suffers significantly fewer losses, we'll implement your strategy fleet-wide for the next raid. Now, as Lady Luck droned through the night sky, surrounded by dozens of other superfortresses, Raymond Swenson checked his calculations for the 20th time. The 60 bombers in his test group had entered the massive cloud formation exactly as planned, maintaining precise altitude and course through instrument flying alone. The theoretical weather patterns he had predicted had materialized with remarkable accuracy. A vast stratocumulus cloud layer extending from 18,000 to 26,000 feet, with exactly the density and moisture content needed to scatter Japanese radar waves. Captain Martindale's voice crackled through the interphone. "How we doing, Ray? Still on course?" Swenson checked his instruments again. "Yes, sir, tracking perfectly. We should emerge from this cloud bank in approximately 12 minutes. That will put us 17 miles northwest of the target area." The pilot's voice betrayed his nervousness. "And you're sure the Japs can't see us in here?" Swenson hesitated only briefly. "The theory is sound, sir. Their radar wavelength should be completely scattered by these cloud formations. They'll see nothing but atmospheric return indistinguishable from the natural cloud pattern." The bomber formation maintained strict radio silence as they penetrated deeper into Japanese airspace. Normally, by this point, they would have encountered the first probing attacks from night fighters. The gunners, those that remained after LeMay's weight-saving reductions, scanned the darkness nervously, expecting enemy aircraft to materialize at any moment. But the night remained eerily empty. No searchlights probed the clouds from below. No tracer fire arced through the darkness. The Japanese appeared completely unaware of their presence. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. At exactly 2200 hours, the bomber formation began its emergence from the cloud layer. Swenson had calculated this moment precisely. They would have just enough clear air to make visual identification of the target area, but would have spent the entire inbound leg concealed within the radar-scattering cloud formations. The navigators and bombardiers hurried to identify landmarks in the darkened city below. Surprisingly, Tokyo appeared largely normal. No blackout had been implemented. Lights still burned in industrial areas. The civilian population had received no warning. The first bombs fell at 22:15 hours. The attack caught Japanese defenses completely by surprise. Anti-aircraft batteries remained silent for critical minutes, as gunners awaited orders that were slow to come. The air raid sirens began their mournful wail only after the first incendiary clusters had already ignited fires across the northern industrial district. Japanese fighter control operators stared at their radar screens in confusion. The American bombers had seemingly materialized from nowhere, already over their targets before detection. For the next 3 hours, Swenson's cloud navigation technique enabled the American bombers to operate with unprecedented freedom. Between bombing runs, the B-29s would disappear back into the carefully selected cloud formations, emerging only to deliver their payloads before vanishing again. Japanese night fighters scrambled in record numbers but found themselves chasing radar ghosts and false returns. The few aircraft that did manage to make visual contact with isolated bombers were unable to coordinate with ground control to find the main formations. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders proved as significant as the physical destruction. Radar operators lost confidence in their equipment. Fighter pilots became hesitant to pursue contacts that might be merely atmospheric anomalies. Anti-aircraft gunners, unable to receive reliable targeting data, resorted to firing blindly into cloud formations, wasting precious ammunition. The carefully choreographed defense system that had claimed so many B-29s in previous raids collapsed into confusion and ineffectiveness. Dawn revealed the extent of the destruction. 14 square miles of Tokyo's industrial district lay in ruins. 8 aircraft factories, 12 machine tool plants, and 19 electrical equipment facilities had been destroyed or severely damaged. Most significantly, the American losses had been a fraction of previous raids. Of the 60 aircraft in Swenson's cloud navigation group, not one had been lost to enemy action. 2 had turned back with mechanical problems, but 58 had returned safely to base, an unprecedented success rate for operations over Japan. The debriefing that followed became the stuff of Air Force legend. General LeMay himself attended, listening intently as Swenson explained the theoretical principles behind his navigation technique and how it could be refined for future operations. The room fell silent as the final casualty figures were announced. The main force, following standard approach routes, had lost 22 aircraft, a 7% loss rate considered acceptable by the brutal mathematics of strategic bombing. Swenson's group had suffered 0 combat losses, statistically impossible by previous standards. LeMay had risen from his seat, cigar clenched between his teeth. "Lieutenant Swenson, I owe you an apology. What we initially dismissed as the stupidest damn idea has proven to be one of the most significant tactical innovations of this air campaign." He had turned to his staff. "Gentlemen, effective immediately, all B-29 operations against the Japanese home islands will incorporate Lieutenant Swenson's cloud navigation techniques. I want our weather officers working with navigation teams to identify and plot ideal cloud formations for maximum radar concealment." For Raymond Swenson, the moment represented a profound validation of his unconventional thinking. The mathematics teacher from Idaho had revolutionized strategic bombing tactics through careful observation and analytical thinking rather than technological superiority. His understanding of the interaction between meteorological phenomena and electromagnetic waves, concepts barely covered in military training, had saved hundreds of American lives and dramatically increased the effectiveness of the bombing campaign. The Japanese response came swiftly but ineffectively. Within days, they had begun modifying their radar sets to operate on shorter wavelengths, less affected by cloud interference. Technical teams worked frantically to install new equipment at coastal stations. But American intelligence monitored these developments closely. When the Japanese adjusted their radar frequencies, Swenson and his growing team of specialized weather navigation officers simply calculated new cloud density requirements and adjusted their routes accordingly. A technological arms race had begun, but one in which the Americans held decisive advantages. Japanese electronics manufacturing, already strained by material shortages and bombing damage, could not keep pace with the rapidly evolving requirements. Each radar modification required weeks or months to implement across their defensive network. The American navigators could adjust their cloud selection parameters within hours of detecting changes in Japanese radar performance. The wider implications of Swenson's discovery extended beyond immediate tactical advantages. Strategic planners at 21st Bomber Command recognized that the technique effectively neutralized Japan's early warning system, allowing for more flexible attack planning. Bomber streams could now approach from unexpected directions, timing their arrival to coincide with favorable cloud conditions rather than being constrained by the need to avoid known radar stations. This operational flexibility multiplied the effective striking power of the B-29 force without requiring additional aircraft. Technical analysis of Swenson's cloud navigation method revealed additional benefits beyond radar concealment. The specific cloud formations selected for operations also disrupted Japanese night fighter tactics in unexpected ways. The diffused light conditions within certain cloud types made visual acquisition extremely difficult, even when fighters were vectored to the correct general location. Additionally, the turbulence and moisture content of the carefully selected formations created challenging flying conditions for the lighter Japanese interceptors, while remaining within the performance envelope of the larger, or more stable B-29s. The strategic impact became evident within weeks. Japanese aircraft production, already declining due to material shortages, plummeted further as factories were destroyed with minimal warning. More significantly, the Japanese diverted precious resources to a desperate attempt to counter the American cloud ghost tactics. Radar technicians were pulled from other critical projects. Fighter units were restructured to operate more independently from ground control. Anti-aircraft batteries were repositioned to cover likely exit routes rather than approach corridors, all adaptations that further reduced the overall effectiveness of their integrated air defense system. For the remaining months of the Pacific War, Swenson's cloud navigation technique underwent continuous refinement. A specialized unit was formed within 21st Bomber Command dedicated to correlating weather forecasts with Japanese radar capabilities. Meteorological reconnaissance flights mapped cloud formations hours before major raids, allowing for last-minute route adjustments to maximize concealment. American signals intelligence monitored Japanese communications to detect changes in radar frequencies or fighter control procedures, feeding this information back to the navigation planning teams. The human dimension of this innovation remained its most remarkable aspect. Raymond Swenson had not relied on classified research from MIT or Bell Labs. He had not required exotic new equipment or extensive crew retraining. Instead, he had simply observed natural phenomena with a mathematician's eye and recognized patterns that others had overlooked. His stupid cloud trick, as it became affectionately known among bomber crews, demonstrated that even in an age of technological warfare, human insight could still prove decisive. The legacy of Swenson's innovation extended far beyond World War II. Post-war analysis by the Strategic Bombing Survey specifically highlighted the cloud navigation technique as one of the most significant tactical developments of the Pacific Air Campaign. Air Force navigation schools incorporated its principles into their curriculum. Weather reconnaissance became a standard component of strategic mission planning. Perhaps most significantly, military planners gained a deeper appreciation for the potential of using natural phenomena as operational tools rather than merely as obstacles to be overcome. The human cost of the bombing campaign against Japan remains a subject of historical and ethical debate. The incendiary raids claimed hundreds of thousands of civilian lives and destroyed vast areas of Japanese cities. Yet, from the perspective of American aircrews, Swenson's innovation represented something unequivocally positive, a way to complete their assigned missions while dramatically reducing their own casualties. For the men who returned safely to bases on Guam, Tinian, and Saipan because Japanese radar operators saw only clouds where bombers flew, the mathematics teacher from Idaho had performed a kind of miracle. As morning broke over the Pacific on March 16, 1945, exhausted bomber crews gathered for debriefing at Northfield, Guam. Captain William Martindale placed his hand on Raymond Swenson's shoulder as they walked toward the operations building. "You know what you did last night, don't you, Ray?" The navigator adjusted his glasses nervously. "Just applied some basic physics, sir." Martindale shook his head. "No, Lieutenant, you just changed the war." 300 bombers flew over Tokyo for 3 hours, and the Japs never knew what hit them until it was too late, all because you looked at clouds differently than everyone else. The success of Swenson's cloud navigation technique reverberated through the 21st Bomber Command with the force of revelation. Within days, meteorologists became the most sought-after personnel on every airbase. Weather forecasting shifted from a support function to a central component of mission planning. Pilots who had once cursed cloud formations as navigational hazards now specifically requested routes through carefully selected stratocumulus layers. The bombers that had once announced their presence with the thunder of engines now slipped through Japanese defenses like ghosts, materializing from cloud banks only at the moment of weapons release. Major General Curtis LeMay recognized the potential for expanding Swenson's discovery beyond its initial application. By April 1, 1945, he had established the Special Weather Exploitation Unit, dedicated solely to analyzing how atmospheric conditions could be weaponized against enemy defenses. First Lieutenant Swenson found himself elevated to unit commander, despite his junior rank, an unprecedented promotion that reflected the value of his insight. The mathematically minded Navigator assembled a team that combined meteorologists, radar specialists, and veteran navigators into an analytical powerhouse that transformed weather from an obstacle into a strategic asset. The The Japanese response revealed both ingenuity and desperation. By late April, their radar technicians had managed to modify some coastal stations to operate on shorter wavelengths, less affected by cloud interference. Fuel-starved fighter groups adopted new tactics, stationing aircraft at dispersed locations along likely bomber routes rather than waiting for radar vectors. Civil defense organizations implemented blackout procedures starting at sunset, regardless of confirmed bomber approaches, a tacit admission that their early warning system had been compromised. These adaptations consumed precious resources and imposed additional strain on Japan's already fragile war economy. Admiral Motomi Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet responsible for home island defense, wrote in his diary on April 12th, "The Americans have somehow rendered our radar network unreliable. Bomber formations appear directly over targets without warning, then vanish again. Our fighter pilots report pursuing radar contacts only to find empty sky or impenetrable clouds. The psychological effect on our defensive forces is perhaps more damaging than the physical destruction. We face an enemy that seems able to control his visibility at will." The technological race between American navigation techniques and Japanese radar continued throughout the spring of 1945. Each Japanese adaptation met with a corresponding American counter-adjustment. When Japanese technicians modified their radar to better penetrate certain cloud densities, Swenson's team simply identified different cloud formations that remained effective against the new parameters. When fighter groups began patrolling at multiple altitudes simultaneously, the bombers adjusted their routes to pass through cloud layers too turbulent for the lighter Japanese aircraft to operate effectively. Each move in this deadly chess match further strained Japan's diminishing resources, while imposing minimal additional costs on the Americans. The human dimension of Swenson's innovation emerged in the letters home from bomber crews. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, a radio operator with the 504th Bombardment Group, wrote to his wife, "There's this skinny lieutenant with glasses who's changed everything. Before he came along, every mission was like rolling dice with death. We'd watch other planes get hit, go down in flames, knowing our turn might be next. Now we slip through the clouds like we're invisible, and Jerry says it's all because this lieutenant figured out that clouds mess with their radar. A schoolteacher who figured out something all the big-shot scientists missed. Makes you wonder how many other solutions are right in front of us, if only we looked at things differently." By May 1945, the statistical impact had become undeniable. Mission completion rates exceeded 98%, an almost miraculous figure compared to the 70 to 80% rates of early operations. Combat losses to enemy fighters dropped by 83% across all bombing groups implementing Swenson's techniques. The operational implications were profound. More bombs on target, fewer replacement crews needed, reduced aircraft production requirements, and perhaps most significantly, the psychological relief for air crews knowing they had a powerful new advantage over enemy defenses. The moral complexity of this tactical breakthrough could not be ignored. Improved navigation techniques and reduced American casualties came with a devastating corollary: more effective destruction of Japanese cities and higher civilian casualties. The firebombing campaign that Swenson's innovation made more efficient ultimately claimed more than 500,000 Japanese lives and left millions homeless. The success of these operations, measured in square miles of urban area destroyed, represented human suffering on a catastrophic scale. This ethical contradiction weighed heavily on many of the men involved, including Swenson himself. Captain William Martindale found Swenson alone on the airfield one night after a particularly devastating raid on Nagoya. The Navigator sat on a fuel drum, staring at the stars with a distant expression. "You look troubled, Ray," Martindale said, settling beside him. Swenson removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I keep thinking about the mathematics of it all, sir. I found a way to save our boys, maybe hundreds of them. But those same calculations mean more Japanese civilians die because we get through more effectively." Martindale remained silent for a long moment before responding. "War asks impossible things of decent men, Ray. You didn't start this fight. You didn't choose the targets. You just found a way to protect our crews while they carry out their orders. The ethical dilemma extended beyond individual conscience to strategic planning. At 21st Bomber Command Headquarters, targeting officers recognized that Swenson's technique had effectively removed one of the few remaining constraints on their operations. Weather conditions that would have previously forced mission cancellation now became tactical advantages. The frequency and intensity of bombing operations increased accordingly. The May 25th raid on Tokyo launched 464 B-29s against the Japanese capital, the largest single bomber formation in history. To that point, with 339 of B, those aircraft deliberately routed through precisely mapped cloud formations that rendered them invisible to Japanese radar. The psychological impact on the Japanese population manifested in ways that military planners had not anticipated. Intercepted civilian communications revealed a growing belief that the Americans possessed supernatural abilities that they could appear and disappear at will, materializing from the heavens to rain destruction before vanishing again into the night sky. Buddhist priests reported increased attendance at temples as civilians sought spiritual protection from an enemy that seemed to transcend normal physical limitations. The rational explanation, clever exploitation of meteorological phenomena against radar wavelengths remained unknown to the Japanese public, allowing mythological explanations to flourish amid the terror and uncertainty. For the American aircrews, Swenson's innovation transformed their relationship with the weather itself. The atmospheric conditions they had once feared now became allies, cloud formations, providing concealment, protection, and tactical advantage. Pilots who had previously cursed the Pacific's notoriously unpredictable weather patterns now studied meteorological reports with the intensity of religious texts. A peculiar form of weather worship emerged in crew superstitions, touching clouds for luck during pre-flight inspections, painting cumulus formations on aircraft nose art, navigators wearing blue scarves to symbolize their connection to the protective sky. The technical documentation of Swenson's methodology revealed the elegant simplicity of his insight. His 15-page report, Atmospheric Interference with Japanese Type, 3 radar systems, explained how specific cloud types with particular water droplet sizes and densities created electromagnetic scattering patterns that effectively masked bomber formations. The mathematics involved were complex but not revolutionary. What made Swenson's work remarkable was his cross-disciplinary application of meteorological science to radar engineering, 2 fields that military specialists typically treated as entirely separate domains. By June 1945, Swenson's technique had evolved into a comprehensive doctrine. The Predictive Weather Integration Protocol, developed by his special unit, provided bombing groups with detailed mapping of radar-effective cloud formations for each mission. Navigation routes were planned not just for shortest distance or minimal exposure to enemy defenses, but for optimal utilization of atmospheric conditions. The protocol even incorporated climate pattern analysis to schedule major operations during periods when favorable cloud formations were most likely to occur over target areas, fundamentally changing the rhythm of the strategic bombing campaign. The innovation's significance extended beyond tactical advantage to strategic implications. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, remarked during a Joint Chiefs briefing, "This Navigator's cloud technique represents something beyond merely hiding from enemy radar. It demonstrates our ability to identify and exploit the enemy's technological weaknesses in ways they cannot easily counter. The Japanese invested heavily in their radar network, and we've neutralized that investment with essentially no additional resources on our part. That's the kind of asymmetrical advantage that breaks an enemy's will to continue fighting." Intelligence reports from occupied territories in June 1945 revealed the broader impact on Japanese morale. A resistance operative in Yokohama reported, "The authorities can no longer explain why air raid sirens sound only after bombs are already falling. People no longer believe official explanations. They say American planes have become invisible, that they fly through magical clouds. Some believe the Americans have harnessed spirits to guide their bombs. The authorities' inability to protect the cities has destroyed public confidence more effectively than any propaganda could have done. The ethical burden of this success continued to weigh on Swenson. During a rare leave in Hawaii, he visited a military hospital filled with burned airmen, men who might have joined their comrades in death if not for his innovation. A nurse escorted him through wards, where bandaged figures lay in various states of recovery. "These men are alive because of you, Lieutenant," she said quietly. Swenson nodded silently, the mathematics of survival and death calculating endlessly in his mind. For every American airman saved, how many Japanese civilians had died? The equation offered no moral resolution, only the cold arithmetic of total war. As the summer of 1945 progressed, Swenson's technique became integral to operations beyond strategic bombing. Photo reconnaissance flights adopted modified versions of the cloud navigation method, allowing them to document Japanese defensive positions without detection. Carrier-based naval aircraft began implementing similar approaches against coastal radar stations. Perhaps most significantly, weather reconnaissance itself evolved into a specialized combat function aircraft specifically tasked with mapping cloud formations that could be exploited by subsequent bomber formations. The transformative nature of Swenson's innovation appeared in the official mission planning directive issued by 21st Bomber Command on July 7, 1945. Weather is no longer to be considered primarily as a constraint on operations, but rather as a tactical resource to be exploited. Mission planners will incorporate meteorological intelligence with the same priority as enemy defensive positions and target characteristics. Favorable cloud conditions may justify mission execution even when other factors might suggest postponement. The technical adaptation continued on both sides until the war's end. By early August, Japanese radar technicians had managed to modify approximately 30% of their coastal stations to partially overcome the cloud interference effect. In response, Swenson's unit developed increasingly sophisticated navigation routes that combined multiple cloud layers at different altitudes, creating a three-dimensional concealment strategy that remained effective even against improved radar systems. The mathematical complexity of these navigation solutions reflected Swenson's background in advanced trigonometry and spatial relationships, transforming bomber navigation from a primarily horizontal challenge to a fully volumetric equation. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Raymond Swenson was awakened by his commanding officer. "They've done something extraordinary, Ray. A single B-29 just destroyed most of Hiroshima with one bomb." The atomic age had arrived, rendering much of conventional strategic bombing doctrine instantly obsolete. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb devastated Nagasaki. The implications for Swenson's innovation were immediate and profound. The cloud navigation technique that had protected hundreds of aircraft, delivering thousands of conventional bombs, might soon be needed only for solitary bombers, carrying single weapons of unprecedented destructive power. The Japanese surrender on August 15, 1945, brought the Pacific War to its conclusion, but the legacy of Swenson's innovation continued to evolve in unexpected ways. During Operation Crossroads in 1946, the atomic tests at Bikini Atoll, modified versions of his cloud navigation techniques, were employed to position observation aircraft at safe distances while maintaining optimal visualization of the detonations. Weather study had been transformed from a support function to a central component of military planning, establishing meteorology as a critical discipline in modern warfare. In the immediate post-war period, Swenson declined offers to continue his military career, returning instead to his original ambition of teaching mathematics. In 1947, he accepted a position at Stanford University, where his classes on applied mathematics and atmospheric physics attracted both civilian students and military officers sent for specialized training. His wartime experiences had convinced him that mathematical principles could solve problems far beyond abstract academic exercises, that numbers, properly applied, could save lives in the most concrete and immediate ways. The classified nature of Swenson's wartime work meant that his contribution remained largely unknown to the public for decades. While Curtis LeMay achieved fame and eventually led the Strategic Air Command, the quiet mathematician whose innovation had protected LeMay's bombers returned to civilian life without public recognition. This asymmetry of fame versus actual impact became a recurring theme in the history of military technology. The generals and politicians received accolades, while the technical innovators who made their victories possible often remained in obscurity. The strategic implications of Swenson's discovery extended into the Cold War era. By the 1950s, radar technology had evolved significantly, with shorter wavelengths and more sophisticated signal processing, largely overcoming the specific cloud interference effect he had identified. However, the conceptual foundation he established, exploiting natural phenomena to defeat enemy sensing systems, became a cornerstone of electronic warfare doctrine. His cross-disciplinary approach that combined meteorology with electromagnetic theory established a template for subsequent generations of military scientists seeking unconventional solutions to tactical challenges. The human dimension of Swenson's story resonated beyond its technical achievements. In 1962, during a reunion of the 505th Bombardment Group, former Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan approached Swenson with tears in his eyes. "Professor, you wouldn't remember me, but I was a radio operator on 31 missions over Japan. The doctors told me after the war that I had less than a 5% chance of surviving that many operations based on the loss rates before your cloud technique. There are hundreds of men alive today, men with children and grandchildren now, because you looked at clouds differently than anyone else." The moral complexity of Swenson's contribution remained unresolved in his own mind. In a rare 1975 interview for an Air Force historical project, he reflected, "I developed a technique that saved American lives by making our bombers more effective at destroying Japanese cities. Both parts of that equation matter. I protected our boys, which I can never regret. But that same protection meant more efficient destruction for the other side. War creates these impossible moral calculations where doing good in one direction often means causing harm in another. I still haven't reconciled that mathematics, even after all these years." The technical legacy of Swenson's innovation extended far beyond its immediate military application. The underlying principles he identified, how electromagnetic waves interact with atmospheric conditions, influence the development of weather radar, satellite communications, and even modern stealth technology. His cross-disciplinary approach demonstrated how breakthrough innovations often occur not through entirely new discoveries, but through novel connections between established fields, seeing relationships that specialists in either individual domain might miss because of their narrower focus. The historical significance of Swenson's stupid cloud trick achieved formal recognition in 1983, when declassified documents allowed military historians to fully assess its impact on the Pacific bombing campaign. Analysis by the Air Force Historical Research Agency concluded that the technique had likely saved between 800 and 1,000 aircraft and approximately 8,000 airmen, while significantly accelerating the destruction of Japanese industrial capacity. The report characterized it as one of the most consequential tactical innovations of World War II, achieved without new technology or equipment, through the insight of a single officer applying mathematical principles to observed phenomena. For the aging veterans of the B-29 campaign, the declassification of Swenson's work provided context for experiences they had never fully understood. Many had noticed the dramatic reduction in losses after March 1945, but had attributed it to Japanese defensive weaknesses rather than American tactical innovation. Learning about the mathematical principles that had protected them decades after the fact prompted a flood of letters to Swenson, now a retired professor in his 70s, expressing belated gratitude for a protection they hadn't known they had received. The broader cultural impact emerged gradually as Swenson's story became incorporated into military education. The Swenson case became standard curriculum at service academies and war colleges, used to illustrate how innovative thinking could achieve results that technology alone could not. His approach demonstrated that transformative military advantages often came not from having better equipment than the enemy, but from using existing resources in unexpected ways. This lesson proved particularly relevant in asymmetrical conflicts, where technological parity could not be assumed. The final validation of Swenson's contribution came in 1989, when the Air Force posthumously awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, 44 years after his innovation had saved thousands of American lives. The citation read in part, First Lieutenant Raymond Swenson's development of cloud-based radar deception techniques fundamentally altered the strategic bombing campaign against Japan, providing protection for American aircrews while significantly enhancing mission effectiveness. His application of mathematical principles to meteorological phenomena demonstrated extraordinary technical insight and moral courage in the highest traditions of the United States Air Force. The legacy of Swenson's innovation continues to resonate in modern warfare, where the interaction between natural phenomena and electromagnetic systems remains a critical domain of military competition. The principle he established that nature itself could be weaponized through proper understanding of physics and mathematics has influenced everything from modern stealth technology to electromagnetic pulse weapons. His fundamental insight that the environment is not merely a backdrop for military operations but can be an active participant in them has transformed how military planners conceptualize the battlespace. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Raymond Swenson's story lies in its demonstration of how individual insight can change the course of history. A single lieutenant with a background in mathematics education recognized a relationship between clouds and radar that had eluded the finest scientific minds of the era. His stupid cloud trick saved thousands of American lives while transforming the strategic bombing campaign that ultimately helped end the Pacific War. The mathematical teacher from Idaho had applied classroom principles to the deadliest conflict in human history and found an elegant solution where none had seemed possible. In the final analysis, Swenson's innovation represents both the triumph of human ingenuity and the tragedy of its application in warfare. His mathematical insight protected American aircrews while making the destruction of Japanese cities more efficient, a morally complex equation with no clear resolution. Yet within this contradiction lies a profound truth about warfare itself, that even in humanity's darkest enterprise, individual acts of brilliance can reduce suffering for some, while the broader conflict continues to create it for others. This paradox defined not just Swenson's contribution, but the nature of technological innovation throughout the Second World War. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.